This man's job makes him, on the outside, one of the last people you would think would ever be accused of this kind of crime, allegedly hitting a baby and giving that baby a fractured skull. His job, a labor and delivery nurse. It's now his former job, and we'll dive into what he reportedly told law enforcement about what happened and what his mom had to say on Facebook and what that could mean for her son's case. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Labor and delivery nurses are highly trained people who are supposed to be there with you every step of the way when you're a new parent and you're in the hospital. I mean, I still remember the faces of the labor and delivery nurses that we saw at the hospital when we had our kids. Knowing how impactful and important L&D nurses are really makes this story just so shocking and disturbing, because this now former labor and delivery nurse, Dustin Clark, is facing charges. He's 30 years old and he lives in the area of Monroe, Louisiana, that's in the northern part of the state. Now, professionally, Dustin takes care of babies, and at home, he was given the gift of being able to take care of this child. We are blurring his face. The baby, just 5 months old. Dustin adopted the baby boy. He's the sole provider for the child, only the two of them living at home. Dustin's Facebook lists his relationship status as single. Now, professionally, Dustin worked at St. Francis, which is a hospital in Monroe, again in the northern part of Louisiana, about 2 hours east of Shreveport. Dustin appeared to be a proud dad. He often posted for pictures of his son and him together, and you could just look at how he presented himself publicly. And one could say, looking at these pictures, that the 5-month-old boy was Dustin's world. Now, even though solo parenting, look, it is hard, it is stressful. Nurses, they work long and odd hours. They deal with a lot of stress. I think we can all agree, though, there is no excuse for what deputies say happened, leading to Clark's arrest on September 16th. The 5-month-old boy was brought to the hospital, one that is 35 minutes north of the hospital that Clark worked at. And it wasn't Clark who brought the baby to staff at that hospital. It was one of Clark's friends, according to KNOE-TV. The television station reviewed court documents. Now, this baby was brought to the hospital because he not only had swelling, he had a fractured skull. Now, the injury was so serious that the baby had to be taken to a hospital in Shreveport that's more than 2 hours west, so that baby could receive specialized care. Now, nurses are trained to recognize where there could be cases of abuse and to call law enforcement when they see that. And in this situation, they called law enforcement, who began an investigation into the labor and delivery nurse, Dustin Clark. And according to KNOE, Clark, when he was interviewed by authorities, did not deny that he hit his 5-month-old son. He reportedly told deputies that 2 days before his arrest, this was on September 14th, when that baby was brought to the hospital, he was feeding the baby, and he said the baby just all day was so fussy. This baby was fussing so much that Dustin was trying to calm the baby down multiple times, and the baby would just not calm down. And that's when Clark said he, quote, his words, reportedly snapped. And he slapped that 5-month-old baby, allegedly fracturing that baby's skull, his adopted son. Dustin was arrested, and he is now charged with second-degree cruelty to juveniles, and domestic abuse battery. Dustin was granted a $15,000 bond. Now, if he told detectives that he, quote, snapped, that would obviously throw out any kind of defense that he wasn't the one responsible for the injuries to his son, or any sort of defense that it was an accident that all of this happened. Now, Dustin's mom is sticking by her son, and she took to Facebook in a post that frankly could impact his defense as well, depending on the strategy and how all this case goes out, if it even goes to trial. She wrote, quote, my son is not, capital letters, at all an evil person. He made a mistake to someone he loved very much. We all know it was wrong. He will also be getting help for the things he has been through. I also thank God the baby is doing well. Thank you, Jesus. So this mom is standing by her son, who now is receiving attention nationally for what he allegedly did. And she's trying to do some damage control, it seems, after he allegedly fractured his adopted son's skull. It's unclear what she meant, though, by saying what her son had been through. Now, we did see a commenter say that they have never seen Dustin with a, quote, mean bone in his body, and that he made a, quote, terrible decision in a moment of frustration. Of course, some people could look at what is being alleged and say that was more than just a mistake or a terrible decision when you think of the injuries that this baby received. And even though the mom did say the baby is doing well, it is unclear officially what the condition of that child is. Now, as for Dustin's career, if he is ever going to work as a nurse again, it's going to at least be at a different hospital than the one he was working at prior to his arrest, because he was reportedly fired by St. Francis Hospital in Monroe, Louisiana. And St. Francis released a statement to KNOE-TV saying, quote, "The safety and security of our patients, team members, and community are top priorities. Our team member hiring process is extremely rigorous and includes background checks, multiple reference checks, and other nationally recognized best practices. At this time, we can't share any further details of the situation due to workplace privacy laws." In putting this story together, I put Dustin Clark's name into TruthFinder.com. We use TruthFinder when it comes to putting our stories together because they can give us good insight on the people that we're talking about, specifically whether they have any sort of priors or criminal record. And the only thing that came up for Dustin was some kind of traffic citation from 2017 in Escambia County, Florida. But in terms of serious criminal allegations that he faced, his criminal history is clean. At Law&Crime, we partner with TruthFinder. We use it to get details on the people involved in our stories. But even if you don't work in true crime, it can be a great tool to give you some peace of mind, as it is one of the largest public record search services in the United States. And with the paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. And right now, you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/OTC. Join us now to talk a little bit more about this is trial attorney and family law attorney Randy Kessler. It's always great to have you on Law&Crime. This story, just knowing that he was a labor and delivery nurse, to be accused of this, just what do you make of that?
You know, it's sort of my life in a nutshell. I never know who's going to walk in the door, right? People come in, they look normal, they act normal, and the first thing they tell me is, you know, I'm transitioning, or my spouse is doing this, or you're never going to believe what I'm being accused of. It just, you know, the world is upside down, and it's not just today, it's just now with so much social media and so much, everyone's got a cell phone, there's more exposure. So first thing that tells me is we should just never be shocked. And the other thing that it tells me, Chris, that's really sad is you can't predict or prevent everything. You know, there's some people that you know, their signs, their, you know, social media posts, the, you know, people that do horrible things and shoot at people. If you follow them on social media, you might predict it. But there are people like this that, my goodness, he's a nurse and he takes care of little babies, and he's someone who hurt a little baby. It's terrible. It is, and I think, you know, the way it was described, or what he had admitted to reportedly, was that he snapped because the baby wouldn't calm down. But then I look at, and by no means am I a doctor, you know, or an EMT or something like that, but then, you know, this baby had a fractured skull and swelling. And so it seems like you can't just, oh, I snapped and I had a bad day. Like, it just doesn't, there's something about that seems off, that it wasn't just a mistake. You know, and when you look at some of these cases, and even in your work, I mean, how do you kind of, I guess from a trial standpoint, when you take on a case like this, I mean, how do you, I guess, make the argument to a jury that this, maybe even if it is a one-time thing, that it's not just like a mistake or something like that? We're getting some serious expert witnesses, right? There's going to be some psychologists, because even when he concedes that he's the cause, he doesn't say, I beat the hell out of this child. He's saying, I snapped and I made a mistake. It was a lot more than snapping, a lot more than a mistake. He's got some serious anger issues and impulse actions. Something caused him to do this besides just the child was crying. And so we got to figure that out. I can't imagine it's going to go to trial. I mean, that's, you know, someone who hurts a child like that, I don't care if it's really a hard burden, everyone's going to want to find him guilty. So I don't know how he goes to trial on that, but yeah, you got to look at what's going on in his mind, and trying to get inside the mind of someone who's insane or not altogether there is hard. But you're right, Chris. And I guess the silver lining is at least he owned it and said, I did it, and brought the child in and said, and didn't just go further and say, I'm going to cover this up by, you know, killing the child and burying the child, which we've seen in a lot of your stories. So,
you know, if there's a silver lining, hopefully the child recovers and has a full life and gets far away from this guy.
Yeah, like when you look at a silver lining too on this, because you have, you know, from a defense attorney standpoint, we've had a lot of defense attorneys on, and I know you talk with a lot of defense attorneys where their response when you're like, if you're talking to the police, what do you do? And they say, don't say anything at all. And I'm just looking at it from a, you know, I guess from a law perspective, the defense of I didn't do it is out the window because he said he did it. He snapped. How could that statement, because on one hand, I don't think you want to cover it up, and there's something to be said about being honest and being forthright, but then at the same time, if you're a defense attorney, that statement I feel like could limit your defense.
Yeah, I think we just pivoted. We just jumped over, we hurdled over the guilt or innocence right into sentencing, right? Because this goes to remorse and how does he accept responsibility? Does he want treatment? That doesn't go to guilt or innocence. That goes to sentencing and how do we prevent him from doing this to anybody else? What kind of punishment does he deserve? What kind of help does he get? I think the guilt or innocence is gone. You know, the only question is, do they charge him with malice aforethought? You know, did he just snap? Is it something that it was just a murder 2 instead of murder 1, but it wasn't a murder, obviously. But, you know, those kind of thoughts go into the prosecution. What are we going to try to charge him with? But I think really all this goes to what's the resolution? He's going to be found guilty of something. And the question is, how do we punish him? And what's the best punishment? Not just to punish him, but to see if he can be back in society, if society's going to give him a chance, or if he's going to be in jail the rest of his life. I think, you know, and it's sort of telling to me that there's only a $15,000 bond. That's sort of shocking. I mean, a guy that, you know, works around children and he's prone to be involved with and in front of other children. I'm sure part of the bond was you're staying away from children, staying away from work, but why even let him out there? He may take his own life at this point. He's so upset with what he did. He cares for children every day. If he starts introspecting, what's my job? What's my purpose in life? To bring children into this world, to make sure that you arrive healthy and they leave the hospital healthy. And he did the exact opposite. I mean, he's got a lot going on upstairs, I'm sure.
Right, because I also think too, I mean, like, you know, in parenting, and I know you're a parent as well, and like we've all been there. Like it's a stress, there are stressful times, but there's still like an extra gear that I can't imagine getting to the point of where like you would do this and do something to the point where it's like, you know, babies are delicate, but to fracture a skull, I just can't get past that. Legally, let's just say, because I think that there's a sense of like, okay, so if this baby is okay now, you know, the baby hasn't passed away, but we don't know what type of impact this injury could have. I mean, the baby's 5 months old, and let's say 2 years from now, the baby has a learning disability or something like that, and this case is closed. Could he eventually face more charges if eventually there's a way to look and say, actually what happened a couple years ago or wherever it may be was much worse than we first thought?
I don't think so. I think, you know, you're going to have to make a decision. The justice system doesn't leave its doors open forever and have people looking over their shoulders. There's going to be some sort of closure. They're going to have to predict. There'll be medical testimony about what the future damages and, you know, life expectancy is of this child. But the other thing you mentioned, Chris, again, it's, you know, his role in life as a nurse in that kind of unit. It's the stories that bring the most attention, right? The person in charge of the ethics investigation is the one charged with ethical violations. The person in charge of, you know, creating the rules is the one violating the rules. The person in charge of taking care of little babies is the one who hurt a baby. It's just, you know, there's no safety net. You can't trust anybody in today's world, and it makes the world a scarier place. You know, you see somebody and you say, well, at least that person is trustworthy. You know, it just goes right out the window. The older we get, the more life we experience, you realize nobody's perfect, and everybody could fail. And this is just, you know, it's another one of those terrifying moments, you know, when you just, what's going to fall next? Who's going to shoot who's going to do something terrible? It's just one more in that pile of, oh my gosh, you know, I can't believe that happened. I can't believe that happened. This guy's got to be off the streets, in my opinion. He's got to be put away until somebody makes a determination that he's never going to do this again. And I don't know how you can determine that, right? They said they had a rigorous investigation into their hiring policies and that they were very good about figuring out people's background. So assuming that he has no real blemishes in his background that would have alerted anybody to this, now how do we know it's not going to happen again? And how do you prevent the next person from doing this if they did a really good background check like the hospital says that they did?
Yeah, because even as, like, let's just say it is a one-off. You know, he never showed any sign of any sort of issues whatsoever. Like, I still keep thinking back to this child needing to be taken to a hospital in Shreveport, which is 2 hours away, to handle more, with more critical care. And I know Monroe, where this happened, is not a huge community, but needing to go get a specialist because of that, it was that concerning. I keep coming back to that. As a family law specialist, and it comes to adoption, what typically goes into, here's Dustin Clark, this nurse, and he says, you know what, I want a child of my own. I don't have a partner at this point, but I just want to raise this child. I mean, what is the process that someone goes through where they would be given the opportunity to raise a baby like he was?
Well, first thing, let's make absolutely clear, he's never adopting a child again, period. That's clear, right? So this is where these underfunded agencies and overworked agencies like the Departments of Family and Children's Services and the adoption agencies, they always get criticized when something like this slips through the cracks. But their job is to do their best, right? You've got a choice of a child staying in a foster home or living in an orphanage or going to a good home. And you've got to figure out what a good home is. And all you can look is at the past history. And this guy checked the boxes, right? He was working as a nurse with young children, young infants. I'm sure they did their job and they did their homework and there was nothing that jumped out at them. They do not have a duty to hire the FBI and do psychological testing and polygraph testing of every potential adoptive parent. Their job is to find and do the most they can do with the resources they have. And I'm sure they did a good job, and I'm sure he passed all the tests. And that's what makes this so fascinating in a negative way, that somebody that looked this good on paper was not this good.
Well, because I also wonder too, I mean, he's 30 and a single parent of a child. I mean, that's a lot to take on, at 30. And I know there are people much younger who have kids and are great parents, but it seems like DCF or whoever it may be, that local organization kind of gave a flyer and said, okay, he's a labor and delivery nurse. And I'm sure in terms of candidates looking to adopt, I mean, that seems like something that you would feel really good about compared to other candidates who come through the door.
Right. I mean, all of us that have had children, every one of us that have had children, have left the hospital with the same exact thought. You're letting me leave with this little human being? I mean, where's the guidebook? Where's the outline of how do I do this, right? We all leave, and it's a huge responsibility. And you hope that your life skills and how you were raised by your parents and how you were, taught in school translates to care. But we just don't know, and there is no guidebook, and you can't monitor, and not just adoptive parents. I mean, parents that have children that don't know how to take care of children. How do they learn? We don't monitor them. Should the government, and maybe that's the next step one day, that, you check in on children 1 month after they leave the hospital, 2 months, and you see how the parents are doing. But can you imagine the resources that would be needed if there are no signs, no telltale signs? You're just going to check everybody, and then we become a big brother state, right? In 1984, George Orwell, we're monitoring how everyone manages. There's a balance. There are always going to be situations like this. Thank goodness they're so unique and so rare that when you cover them, everybody says, wow, because we haven't heard about these every day. It does seem like they're getting to be more and more anomalies like this, and I don't know if it's more social media, more court coverage, more law and crime exposure, because you guys see a lot and get a lot reported to you that you can cover. I don't know what it is, but yeah, you're right. He did pass the smell test. If you look at it, I think everyone in America would say, this guy's a perfect adoptive parent. He wants to give back. He wants to love a child of his own. He's taking care of all these other children. He's got the skill set. He probably was better skilled at taking care of an infant than I was when my child was born. He knew, what this type of crying meant. He knew how to change a diaper. He knew the things that I had to learn.
Right, and the things that really make you stressed out too, in those early stages when you're like, for me, I had never held a baby before my own, So like, he was on paper a great candidate, it seems. Who in these situations, because he was a single parent, this child was adopted, who advocates for the child? Who is the child's attorney almost in this case going forward?
So what's interesting, so the child doesn't have an attorney, but the adoption agency always has some priorities, some obligations, and they've got to look after the children's best interest. That's the state, and the law is always what's in the child's best interest. And like I said before, it's a balancing act. Where's the child before the adoption? If the child's in a wonderful place, you're not going to adopt a child from a home. Like if the child's in an intact home, let's take an extreme example. A mother and father that are married, you don't take a child away from that home because the child's got a good home. In those situations, if a parent dies and another one is disabled, you still have to have a hearing to make sure you terminate the natural parent's rights and find that there's no way that the natural parent can continue to take care of the child before you even open the door to moving the child. So the first question is, where was the child first? And then the next question is, what are the options? A government home, a government facility, or a child nurse who's got the experience? I mean, it just, it's probably one they didn't really look at too carefully because, like you said, it checked all the boxes. This was the easy one of the other ones they had. They have people that have had drug histories and have recovered and recuperated and not gone back to jail that they say, okay, this person has shown themselves to be stable now. This wasn't one of those. This was an easy one, I imagine, for the adoption agency who is in charge of looking after the child's best interest.
And this baby is 5 months old and had been in the care of this labor and delivery nurse, now facing some serious charges. Let's just say a member of his family says, because they've become attached to this baby. I don't know what the situation would be, and this is more like a general question. Let's just say that there's a family member that says, I can take care of this child. How do you figure out where this baby goes next? Because if DCFI also would bet, or whatever child services agency in Louisiana or wherever this baby, came from, could look and be like, I don't want this child anywhere close to the family. Like, how do you figure where this baby goes next?
So that's a great question. Once you adopt a child, that child is treated the exact same as if you gave birth to that child or your spouse gave birth to that child. So it is not like, okay, the adoption's undone and the child's back on the market for the next, person, the highest bidder. It's this guy's child. That's his child. And so his family members who may have bonded and may have a reason to reach out and want to be involved and might have some continuity. Again, it's a baby. If the child had gotten to bond a lot with a lot of this guy's family members, it'd be more likely that a family member gets the child. I do think, however, because this guy had some mental issues, they're going to look a lot more carefully at his family members. He may have some very stable family members, but if there's something genetic or hereditary or something that's psychologically inherited, they're going to look very carefully at any family members that want to step in. But again, this child needs a home, and someone who's met the child and loves the child is probably better to get going faster than someone who has no idea who this child is. But it's not a job I'd want to have, placing this child.
No, and it's one of those things where I think often the system, and whatever people work within it, they get hammered in cases like this. But then you think of just the everyday grind and what they see. I think it's always important to think about, I'm sure there are some really good people that work in the system that are trying to do right, but it's a tough.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some
job.
Survivor's guilt, some people that
Yeah.
were part of that adoption that said, how did I miss this? What did I miss this? And I would tell them, from what I can tell, you didn't miss anything. I don't know enough about it, but, please keep doing your good work because, 99% of the time you're doing a great job in getting children a better life.
And even with that, just lastly on the point of if the law looks at this baby, as if it was a biological connection, is there any difference though if, say, he's convicted of these charges, takes a plea deal on these charges, that the state could be like, this was a mistake, we're taking this baby away for sure, as opposed to in some cases, I'm sure there are examples, maybe in a two-spouse home, where that child could end up back in that home or with the family. There's no difference between, I guess at this point, once an adoption's finalized, it's done. It's not like you can take back the child.
Right. I mean, I don't think they're going to go and undo the adoption. I think they're going to terminate his rights as a parent. So it will be the same thing, effectively, that he's got no rights as a father. He's got no rights to this child. But the one thing it does keep in place is that if he dies without a will, the child may still be able to inherit from him. But yes, I don't think they're going to go back. It's probably more work to try to undo the adoption, and you got to figure, was the adoption done right? And the adoption probably was done correctly, so you don't undo something that was done correctly. You find a way to terminate it. Just like a marriage and annulment, right? If somebody gets married and they go through the process and they pass, the laws, and they didn't marry their brother, they married somebody that was above age, and they get divorced, and they're no longer married. You don't have to undo the marriage from the get-go. There was a time when they were married. There was a time when he was the legal father. That's never going to be undone, as far as I can tell. So the adoption will stay. His rights are probably going to be terminated. And then whoever steps up, hopefully it's a family member, somebody who's got some motivation other than, hey, maybe I'm a foster parent and I'll just do it for a little bit of time. This child is going to need some TLC, a lot of TLC. But there are a lot of good adoptive parents out there, and I hope the people doing this work don't stop doing it, because children need adoptive parents. Adoptive parents are the best, right?
Yeah. No, incredibly well put. Randy Kessler, thank you as always for being with us on Law and Crime. Tough case, but really appreciate your perspective.
Thanks, Chris.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.